worship leaders, worship musicians, and those who love to worship. If you're familiar with church podcasts or literature, you've probably heard this phrase, engagement. Engagement is the new attendance, apparently. It's not enough that people are just coming to your service. What we want is that they are engaged in church life. And everybody online has 10 tips for how you can increase your church engagement or increase engagement during the worship service. You want to know the truth? Most of those are destined to fail. And here's why. Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Worship Homestead. My name is Nathan Smith. Today we're talking about church engagement, which is a bit of a buzzword right now, and everybody wants to know how to increase engagement. But I'm here to tell you that most of the things that churches are going to try and do will fail because of the major structures that are in church that keep us from engagement. We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, I'd like to give you something. If you go to my website, blueprintsounds.com, you can get access to my free worship training bundle called the Worship Booster Pack. It has online PDFs and classes and everything from songwriting, how to build a better band, church sound, 25 chart-topping arrangement tricks, all that for free if you just go to my website or click on the link nearby, blueprintsounds.com/worship booster pack. All right, let's talk about church engagement. So if you Google how to increase church engagement, you will get a bunch of hits. And here's just a couple of ideas that I pulled offline. Just took less than 3 minutes. Make sure that your church attendees are following along with your church devotional. Make sure that they get involved in small groups. Use a mobile giving app. Get a video LED wall. Reframe lay people involvement as ministry, not volunteer work. And finally, focus your programs around your mission statement. Those are just some ideas that the internet has for how to increase church engagement. But let's back up a second. For most people, what does church look like? I'm not talking about what we think that church accomplishes or what we hope it does for the person. What does church look like for the lay person, no matter what the denomination? You know, if you're Lutheran, Baptist, Catholic, Charismatic, Evangelical, it doesn't matter. There's a couple of very basic things that church does. First, you meet in a building, more than likely. Second, there is a stage. On that stage is a specially trained group of people who are the ministers, and they do most of the talking and most of the singing. Then finally, in front of them is a large group of people which sit in rows or pews facing forward. That's what church looks like on the most mechanical, basic level. Well, did church always look like that? Did it have those elements that I just described where everyone would say, yeah, that's basically what church looks like? Well, no, it didn't always look like that. And that makes a big difference. If you think about what's written about the early church in Acts and in the New Testament, there are some things that we can learn from that. Well, they met all over the place. They met in houses, but they also met in places of business. They met in open squares. And when they met together, they often prayed together. They broke bread together. They ate together. And one other thing that they did is called mutual ministry. They ministered to each other. And it's described here in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 26. Paul is talking to the church in Corinth, and he says, "What is the outcome then, brethren? When you assemble, each one has a psalm, has a teaching, has a revelation, has a tongue, has an interpretation. Let all things be done for edification." Does that sound like your church today? Probably not. Paul is assuming that every man in the community at any point might be ready to stand up and sing a song, give a teaching, share a revelation, have a tongue or an interpretation of a tongue. Wow. That's a very different sort of dynamic than what we expect when we come to church on Sunday morning. How did that change? Well, I won't go too deep into the history, but basically the church became Hellenized or adopted a lot of Greco-Roman culture. Some of the things that we get from Greco-Roman culture are the amphitheater. When you think about the theater and the way that there's a stage and then we have this rising series of benches where people sit, that's Greek. Or the rise of the public speaker, that's Greco-Roman. The Greeks loved public speakers. It was like a sport for them. They had competitions between rhetoricians to see who could make a better point, whether or not it made sense. And that carried over into Roman times as well. The Romans loved to have public speaking. It was as much a sport for them as gladiators or athletes. And as the church developed, it got more and more Greco-Roman in its way of doing things. And this got supercharged during Constantine the Great. Constantine was a Roman emperor who famously got converted to Christianity, and he also used Christianity to his advantage in unifying the Roman Empire, which was under stress at that point. Constantine is the one who stops persecution of Christianity. He returns a lot of property to the church, and he even gives them tax-free status. So a lot of things changed under Constantine, but he also, in turn, changed the church. For example, the basilica, which we think of Peter's Basilica in Rome, the shape of Roman Catholic churches. That basilica is actually a Roman design. It was first used for government functions and getting together, and magistrates would hear cases at the basilica. Well, Constantine took that format, that rectangular shape, and said, hey, let's make this the shape for our churches. That's where we get a rectangular building, people sitting in rows, a stage at the front. That's where that comes from. In the same way that the architecture changed, the role of the minister changed. The clergy started being much more highly differentiated and much more elevated than the laity. So they had special robes, they had a special haircut, they practiced celibacy. All of those elements, the robes, the special haircut, the celibacy, that comes from Greco-Roman pagan temple worship. That's odd. Even the idea of communion changed, because communion used to be part of a greater love feast where Christians would sit down and share a meal together, and as part of that, they would share the Lord's Supper. Well, over time, the Lord's Supper became more and more elevated to an element of ritual, and eventually the love feast was just thrown away. It was forgotten, and in some cases, even banned. All of that cultural baggage and that accumulation of tradition leaves us in a weird spot today, because we have two conflicting priorities. One is the priority of Scripture, and one is the priority of tradition and of structure. On the one hand, we have the Bible, which tells us what we should be shooting for, and 1 John explains it pretty well. In 1 John chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "But if we walk in the light, as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus his Son cleanses us from all sin." That word fellowship is the Greek word koinonia, and what it means is fellowship, association, community, sharing, participation. All of that is wrapped up into the word koinonia. Well, if we want koinonia, Paul explains in 1 Corinthians, hey guys, when you're having your worship meeting together, these are some of the things that you might see in the koinonia. The Psalms, the Revelation, the interpretation of tongues, the teaching, and anybody can do it. On the other hand, we have these structures, and that is, we meet in a building, we have a stage, we have a special class of people that have special training, they do most of the talking and the singing, and then we have all the other people, and they sit in rows facing forward. Well, do those structures give you good koinonia? Is it a good place to have koinonia? No, it's not. And what the church has failed to realize is that life is about trade-offs and choices, and that you have to pick one and that you can't have both. So often churches implicitly or explicitly say, yes, we want love, joy, and peace, we want relationship, we want koinonia, we want fellowship, and we also want a really engaging head pastor and a great worship band on stage and 4 services a weekend, and we want to have this amazing production. I think we can do both. We can chew gum and walk at the same time. That's kind of like telling people, hey, we're doing a great garden this year. It is going to be world class. And also, we're adding a mosh pit. Well, if you have a mosh pit, you're going to have to lower your expectations about what the garden looks like. Suddenly, you'll start pointing to the edge of the mosh pit and saying, oh, see that clump of grass over there? And there's a dandelion there stuck in the mud. We have a garden and we have a mosh pit. No, you mostly have a mosh pit. In the same way, when we talk about the church and we are dedicated to our structures, which are not biblical, they're just historical. When we talk about those structures and we say, yes, we're going to have it in a building where it's on stage and a special group of people do most of the talking and singing and everybody else sits in rows facing forward, but we're also going to do koinonia, then you start saying things like, Oh, but we have a mobile app for giving. That is going to increase church engagement. A mobile giving app is not the same thing as everyone having a revelation, a teaching, a tongue, an interpretation of a tongue, or a word of encouragement. It's not the same thing as fellowship and participation and koinonia. But let me give you an example of koinonia that works. You may know that I lead worship for a house church, and usually there aren't more than 10 people there. It's a very intimate, family-style affair. But a couple of weeks ago, we wanted to invite more people. So we went to a community center and had some friends send out texts to other friends, and probably 25 extra people showed up, which is, for us, is quite large. So because of that, and because I write a lot of the songs that we use for our normal worship from Sunday to Sunday, I said, well, okay, we need to have lyrics so that everybody knows what I'm singing. And so I borrowed a projector from a friend, and it didn't sync up to my computer. So we have like 20 minutes left until we're supposed to start, and there are no words going to go up, right? I'm about to sing songs that nobody knows with no lyrics. So I'm looking through all my songs, trying to think of what if I did more songs that people would know, that most people know on Sundays. So I'm trying to adjust everything. And so my dad is facilitating, and I'm leading worship. And then there's another guy, Jason, who emailed or texted a lot of the people that came. And beforehand, he got up and got on the mic, and he said, Nathan, hey, I just want to encourage you. Do what you do. Don't change it for us, even though there are people here that you've never met before. Don't cater to us. You guys do what you do normally on a Sunday, and we're going to come with you. And I was a little bit surprised because I had picked some more songs that people would know. But in that moment when Jason said that, I felt this thing fall off my shoulders and be like, yeah, we're just going to have church the way that we normally have church. And I'm sorry that we don't have lyrics up on the wall, but hey, we're all here for the same reason, and that's to worship God. So I did. And I was shocked to see how much participation there was. People were singing my songs, and they didn't know my songs, but by the third chorus, they were going along with it, whether or not they knew. It was amazing. Another thing that happened is that my dad, as he was facilitating, didn't really give a sermon much, but one of the things he said was, hey, everybody, if you have something to share, please come up. Please come up and share. And to the point where he would even ask people that he knew, hey, do you have something? Do you have something that you wanted to share that you hadn't? And so we're pulling people out of the crowd. They're coming up and sharing, taking the mic, talking about what God told them this week or what they feel that he put on their heart to pray for the city. It was incredible. I lost track of how many people shared that night. And it was a wonderful, beautiful time in God's presence. And afterwards, the next day, my dad gets some text and says, hey, I missed it last week, but I heard it was amazing. Please let me know when you're going to do this again so that I can come. We didn't even have lyrics on the wall. We had nothing. We had me on an acoustic guitar. We had my dad on a djembe, and that was it. And yet, we had koinonia. We had participation between the people of God. Now, that required trust because some of these people I had never met, but I trusted the person who trusted those people, right? I trusted Jason to invite people that he trusted, and we had a wonderful time together. Can you do that with 300 people? No, probably not. It would probably wind up being absolute chaos. There does need to be some order. But the fact that it's not scalable doesn't mean that you can't do it with 10 or 15 or 20 people, because that's how the early church did it. So if you want koinonia, you can have it, but it has to be nurtured like a garden, and you may not be able to bring all of the structures of church that we've had historically to bear. But which would you rather have, koinonia or those historical structures that I mentioned? Maybe you think you can do both, and more power to you if you can, but if you had to pick, which one would you pick? I leave it to you to decide. Hey, if you're listening to the podcast and enjoyed it, leave a review. It helps me out. Likewise, if you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. Until next week, God bless and goodbye.